Welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday Forum. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis. Today we are doing a special program without a live audience. Instead, we will have an hour to explore pathways to peace and collaboration with two outstanding peace workers. This will be a conversation between Antonio C.S. Rosa, Marilyn Langlois, and myself. So Antonio, who is live with us from Porto, Portugal, is a longtime peace activist, teacher, and journalist. He is the founder editor of Transcend Media Service, an online solutions-oriented peace journalism platform, and he serves on the board of the Transcend Network for Peace Development. Transcend is a unique weekly news service that gathers articles and videos from all over the world and features thoughtful practitioners and conflict transformation and peace. He completed his BA, MA, and PhD degrees in the fields of communication journalism and political science and peace studies at international relations from the University of Hawaii. Marilyn Langlois is a member of the Transcend Media Service editorial committee and of Transcend USA West Coast. She is a volunteer community organizer and international solidarity activist based in Richmond, California. She is also co-founder of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, a member of Haiti Action Committee, and a board member of the International Center for 9/11 Justice. She's retired from previous employment as a teacher, secretary, administrator, mediator, and community advocate. So welcome, Antonio and Marilyn. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you, Georgia.
Well, the first question I want to direct to Antonio about the Transcend Media Service. So tell us a little bit about what motivated you to begin this online journal and what the news that you see filling this from the gaps we have in our normal news sources.
Well, hello, everybody. TMS, Transcend Media Service, started in 2008. We were at the enshrining what's the name, EPU, European Peace University, where Johan used to teach in there, and I was living there also, and a small city, like 2,000 inhabitants in Germany. So we started doing this essentially for members of Transcend to publish what members of Transcend would write, because we had like 500 members in our network, Transcend, and they're mostly intellectuals and professors or students or UN or government officials, people who are interested in conflict resolution, mediation, etc., and peace. And so we started, and today, almost 20 years later, we developed TMS, and we're still developing, because there is always room to know what we are doing. And my hope is that we are contributing something, although, Johan said once that the world is probably not ready for us. However, we have to keep doing and writing, because when the world is ready, we are there already. They can always consult us what we left. So basically, about TMS, but peace journalism, that's how we developed. And right now I'm the only worker on TMS, but we had many students, interns, and volunteers, and during during these 20 years almost.
I want you to talk a little bit about your relationship with Johan Galtung, because I know you've worked with him for many, many years prior to his passing. And I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about that before we go on.
Well, what can I say? Johan Galtung is my main inspiration. I met him at the University of Hawaii. I was an undergraduate when my second year, I was sophomore, and he came to teach. And I remember a friend of mine said, Antonio, Johan is going to teach here. I said, Johan, who? And he goes, you don't know your hangout tune, man? You don't, I didn't. But, you know, we just click it, something happened and we became friends. I started working with him and, and then the rest is history, as they say. It's from 1987 when I think it was 87 when we first met in Hawaii. And, until now, we are pretty much working together. And that's a privilege as far as I'm concerned, working with some, of the stature of a Hong Autumn,
Yeah,
it's a real privilege.
Johan actually gave a workshop here in Sonoma many years ago, and he also spoke at a conference that we put on in Dubrovnik, Croatia back in 2002. So it's a long time ago. Doesn't seem that long ago, but it was. Now I want to get into something that I think both of you will want to talk about, and that is some of the successful strategies for transforming conflicts that you have experienced, that you can discuss with us, tell people about, because this is an area that we have heard about negotiations, which it's a word that has been misused in recent times. And I don't know if I want to put that together with the ideas of transforming conflict, but I think we need to look at the misinformation we're getting around the word negotiation. In America, it means listen to our ultimatums and our demands. That's what we call negotiating. And this, of course, is not negotiating. And yet this is what people expect when they hear of the word negotiation. They associate it with a demand or demands or ultimatums. It's not where you go in with an open mind. So let's first talk about what negotiating means and maybe give an example of it. So either one of you who wants to chime in.
Well, but perhaps Marilyn could talk more about this, mediation thing. Now, I would like to make a distinction between peace journalism and mediation. Okay, the journalist is the person who broadcasts, who writes about the event, whatever it is. And like Johan makes the parallel with the health is very, very appropriate. So the journalist, he he goes talk with the specialists about the cure for health, the procedures, etc., etc. And that the journalist is not an expert in health. Okay, he writes about health. Peace journalist is the same thing. I as a journalist, I go talk with the experts in mediation, etc., because they are working with that. And then I report. Of course, I'm gonna choose my focus, etc. That's another story. But there is a certain distinction that I make between, because when I'm a journalist, I'm not a mediator. No, when I'm talking about cancer, I'm talking about cancer, but I'm always talking with the specialists, a doctor or a patient, talk about the disease, or talk about the violence of the disease, etc. So I report all that. But what are the advances in science that we are doing for combating cancer, etc., etc. So that I get from the experts. So as a journalist, I'm not an expert in mediation or conflict resolution, although of course we know what we're talking about. But it's a very important distinction because the journalist must we must write the closest to the truth possible. And so nothing from my own speculation, my own opinion. No, we must write, the closest to the truth and to reality as possible. So, I don't know if I made myself understood with this distinction here.
Yes, unfortunately, that's a novel concept these days, reporting the truth instead of one's opinion. And I see that even in people I respect, often what they predict is their bias, not what is really being shown in front of them. And that's a discipline to be able to get past one's own bias to look at something in real time, what the truth really is. Marilyn, you probably have something to say about this.
Sure. Thank you, Georgia. I just want to say one quick word about bias, whether it's in journalism, peace journalism as promoted by Transcend, or in the mediation process that I'm going to talk about. Johann Galtung always freely admitted his bias. I think none of us are completely free of bias, if we're
Right.
really honest with ourselves. But he said it's important to, he said, I put my bias right out there up front, and my bias is for solutions that promote the basic needs of everybody, that address, the problems we're facing. That's his bias. So I think it's, and I will accept, I will own that kind of bias myself and put it out there. So that's the underlying motive that that prompts me to do this work. I want to see everyone living in peace and dignity, and to have all of their basic needs met and be able to thrive in a world. Um, so I'm not pretending to be 100% objective ever. It's important to know that. I just want to say too, I got to know Johann Galtung and then Antonio through the Transcend Network about a little over 20 years ago. And it was just such an eye-opener for me. I've always been interested in peace movements, and then got a little bit involved in community mediation work. And learning about the Transcend method promoted by Galtung was just such an eye-opener. It's a very different way of looking at these issues. You asked about negotiation. Well, there's a big difference between negotiation and actual conflict transformation. In typical negotiations, you have two parties that come at each other with very extreme positions, and they argue back and forth, and they might start compromising a little bit, and each side has to give in a little bit and come up with something so that each one gets a little bit of what they want, but not everything. And that is considered that's called a compromise, but that's not the goal of the Transcend method. The goal is more of a both and. Galtung points out 5 possible outcomes to a mediation. You can have either or, meaning either party A wins or party B wins, or you can have nobody wins, just withdrawal, ignore the situation, or you can have half, each gets half, or you can go for both and. And to get to both and, which is the transcendent option, it's important to sit down with the parties and explore their goals and their interests. But the key thing is the goals, defining what are legitimate goals. And in order for a goal to achieve legitimacy, it must be something that the party is willing to concede to their adversary as well. So if you say you want self-determination for your people, understand that the other party should have a right to self-determination as well. If you want to have security, the other party has a right to ask for security too. So once you sift through the legitimate goals of all parties, you can start to come up with some overarching goals, and then use creative thinking and creative problem solving to come up with possible solutions for meeting the goals of all parties. And that's really the ideal that is we strive for. I'll, you had a workshop with Galtung in Sonoma, as I recall. I attended that. I live nearby. We did also 3 or 4 workshops with him in Berkeley, California, and he gives lots and lots of examples. I'm going to just share one of them because it's simple and makes it pretty clear what we're talking about. This is from some decades ago. There was an ongoing border dispute between Ecuador and Peru in a mountainous area. And it just festered on, and there was fighting, and there was violence, and there was discord. And so Galtung sat down with leaders in both areas and tried to get at what it was they really wanted. And and he was able to steer the conversation away from just the egos involved, saying we want to win because we're right and we want to assert our dominance, and they really wanted to have peaceful relations. They wanted to be able for people to be able to enjoy this. It was a beautiful mountainous area for people to enjoy it, and they wanted to have a sense of autonomy of each country. And what they finally came up with was a simple solution. And Johann likes to use very brief formulations. So the formula they came up with was to create, in this disputed area, to create a binational zone and a natural park. So the zone ended up belonging to both countries. Nobody had to give up territory. They owned this particular piece of land jointly, and they turned it into a natural park that was accessible to people from both countries. And so that's just one simple example of this type of thing.
Yes, that's the one I remembered so well too, from reading his book and also from the workshops. That both end is really the goal, not either or, and not winner and loser. And that's a concept that's beyond negotiation, as you just said. But even moving it further back, unfortunately, negotiation means even less than what we were describing. To most U.S. negotiators, anyway, it's about demands, and that's unfortunate. I want to get to some specific places where we are embroiled in current wars and how we might look at. I'm going to ask you to start, Antonio, to talk about. Let's talk about Russia, Ukraine first. Where do you see the points where there could be we could look at negotiating or look at creating a both end scenario there? How would that look?
Well, okay, let me start by saying this. For us to have an idea, I think I touched on this last time. For us to have an idea of the complexity of this conflict, we would have, first of all, that all parties involved agreed to a mediation. Okay, you mentioned demands. Okay, right now all we see are demands from all sides. Either Iran, US, and Israel. Israel only make demands. They don't make any concessions, quote unquote. And so they're making demands. Also, Zelensky also he goes through Europe to pick up armaments or money for armaments. So they are not talking peace. Now, if they don't want to sit down and diplomacy, we will be talking in a vacuum, because the essence of mediation is that we sit down with the parties and we agree, like Marilyn said, to find a solution with which all of them can live. Okay, it's not compromise. Well, I give up this, you give up that. This is a non-starter. We must find a solution with which is the transcendence. Johann talked the transcendence, with which everybody can live with dignity, with the basic human needs, etc., and in harmony. Okay. Now that has to be done with everybody together. And like we could talk about peace in Ukraine and Russia, or but it's not only Putin and Zelensky. No, it's not. NATO is in there, the European Union, and big time. The US, my God, the US started this. We did the Color Revolution in 2014, I believe.
Yes.
And that was the public, with the demonstrations in Maidan Square, and supposedly to take down the oligarchy. Okay, so and as the things develop, as the conflict develops, the violence develops, and we lose track of how everything started, the original conflict. We have in Ukraine the so-called neo-Nazis. They are a big force in there. So there are many, many players that have to come, but they are not ready for that. And that's when Marilyn came. That I was telling you, of the recording. I'm disillusioned because it seems that nobody wants any kind of diplomacy or negotiation. They want to fight and win. And in media, well, the media is a circus. Okay, who is winning, who is losing, and how many dead, etc., etc. So it's very difficult, to pinpoint. I personally, I confess, I do not have a solution or a suggestion for what's going on right now, because we are in the middle of it's only violence and nothing else. It's insanity. So we have to wait and wait until something's going to happen, that they will be ready to sit down and solve the conflicts instead of killing each other like they are doing right now.
This is unfortunate because I recently read and then interviewed Richard Sakwa, who wrote several books on Russia, Ukraine. Lost Peace was one of them, and the Russia-Ukraine War. Follies of Empire was the one that I just interviewed him on. And in that book, and I'm sure both of you are aware of this, that the war in Russia, Ukraine could have stopped 2 months after it started. There were negotiations in Belarus and then in Istanbul, where apparently they were pretty much in 90% agreement of what was going to be the outcome of that war. And in flies Boris Johnson, and then the US will give you more armaments, don't settle. And the pressure then on Zelensky not to settle, that all of you can be the victor, as which is absurd, but he believed it. And the
Yeah.
US and England really kept the war going. It could have ended 2 months after it started. So they were in agreement. They had reached a place where they almost agreed on everything. And now it's going to be much worse than it would have been had they been able to continue without the interference from the UK and the US. So that to me is a very sad case of what happened. And the fact that they were close enough, even in negotiations, to get to a place where it might have stopped. So I just wondered if either of you want to say anything about that before we move on.
Yeah, I thank you for mentioning that, the betrayal of Istanbul, very important moment when the the fighting could have ended very soon after it began. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to show that the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place, which was a real last resort measure. They had taken steps well before February of 2022 to come up with some solution to the underlying conflicts, but came up against a brick wall with the West, especially the United States. And one thing that Russia wanted to achieve was to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table, which they did. As you said, in Belarus and then in Istanbul, they came up with an almost finished agreement, and then it just was completely sabotaged by UK and US. But I also appreciate Antonio bringing in the historical perspective. That's often forgotten. This goes back to well, it goes even further than that, but let's go back to 2014, the Maidan coup d'etat that was supported by the US, where the democratically elected government of Ukraine was ousted. It was viewed as being too Russian friendly, and it was ousted. Violence was fomented in the Maidan demonstrations, where snipers shot at both demonstrators and police, so just to create chaos and oust the government. And then in the wake of that, in 2014 and 2015, there were efforts to resolve the issues, the underlying issues being the question of whether Ukraine should join NATO, number one, but number two, also the desire for self-determination of the Russian-speaking residents of Eastern Ukraine. That is very often not talked about, but that is significant. And in these talks that occurred in Belarus, they resulted in the two Minsk Accords, Minsk I and Minsk II in 2015. And those accords came up with a solution similar to what was achieved in Istanbul, whereby all of the territory would remain part of Ukraine, but there would be autonomy. There would be these autonomous zones where the language would be protected, and various things in place, and Ukraine would not join NATO. Well, the Minsk Accords were not carried out. There was continued violence perpetrated by Ukraine against the residents of the eastern provinces, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And Ukraine banned the use of the Russian language, which is kind of ironic because many Ukrainians, even in the West, speak fluent Russian. It's, they're very similar languages. And then, so part of the problem in resolving these issues is some of the parties to the conflict, and you, as has been indicated by Antonio, you have to be aware that the parties to this conflict are not just Russia and Ukraine, and you've indicated it also, Georgia. It goes to NATO, which is United States, UK, and other NATO members, and they're very, very central and important players in this conflict. So when we got to the point of the special military operation, after it was underway, it came out that the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, who had been part of brokering the Minsk Accords, confessed that that Germany never took those accords seriously. They were intended as a way of stopping the fighting for a while, buying time so that Ukraine could arm itself and the West could supply it with more arms so that they could continue fighting. So it's always important to watch out for bits of bad faith. And in terms of the NATO question, well, first let's go to the Russian speakers. Here, again, this is something where I think the Transcend method can be applied. On the one hand, you have territorial integrity, so, not wanting to change Ukraine's borders. On the other hand, you have the right of peoples to self-determination. And when the people of Eastern Ukraine felt that they were being so severely abused and attacked and oppressed, that they declared independence. Prior to that, Russia and Putin were always fine with keeping those provinces part of Ukraine, but having some sort of autonomy, which, this exists in many countries. You have autonomous regions for certain cultural groups that, want to pursue certain internal practices differently from the rest.
Can I interject one thing in here because you're touching on it, but we haven't mentioned it yet, that there actually was a civil war going on in that Russian part of Ukraine before Putin invaded.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the people there was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of bombardment of cities inside Donetsk and Lugansk. And so the people were getting pretty desperate.
Right.
They asked, that's why they declared independence a day before or 2 days before the special military operation began. And then they declared the People's Republic of Donetsk and the People's Republic of Lugansk, and they asked Russia to help them and to help defend them, which Russia did. Now, and then subsequently, a few months after that, there were referenda held in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, where the people voted overwhelmingly that they wished to join with the Russian Federation. I mean, made very clear their wishes. Prior to that, back in 2014, there had been a referendum among the people of Crimea to join the Russian Federation. And Crimea has traditionally been part of Russia.
Right.
The people that live there view themselves as part of Russia. It's not really, that one isn't really controversial, and yet Zelensky claims that Crimea should be part of Ukraine. So that's the issue of the self-determination of the people. There's really no reason why people shouldn't be able to live side by side with the eastern provinces being part of Russia and Ukraine still existing for the bulk of the country, and have, cooperative exchanges. The other really big issue is the question of NATO. Now, this goes back to the fall of the Soviet Union, when the question came of should Germany be allowed to reunify, and the Soviet Union agreed to pull its troops out of East Germany peacefully, without causing any problems. And in return, the United States promised that, and then Germany would join NATO. The United States promised that beyond Germany joining NATO, NATO would not extend its borders 1 inch to the east, that famous phrase. And of course, the opposite happened. NATO started expanding eastwards a few years later, and it kept getting closer and closer right up on Russia's border, and adding Ukraine to NATO was seen as a very big security threat. That's been a very, very big red line issue.
And of course it would be.
Yeah.
We did cover this in another program that we did, kind of in depth of NATO's encroachment, and even the fact that there was a committee in the US. The committee's purpose, it was called the Committee to Enlarge or Expand NATO. And the person who was head of it was one of the honchos at Lockheed.
Yeah.
So you see the marriage of the military industrial complex with the war mechanisms, which is very disturbing. I want to just move off this a little bit and get into.
Georgia, if I could, just one last
Okay.
word about Ukraine, because I actually wrote an editorial in Transcend Media Service about this called the Austria option for Ukraine. And to take an example from history, after World War II, the Allied powers who had been victorious occupied all of Germany and all of Austria. So that was the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. And in Austria, after much negotiation and diplomacy and figuring things out back and forth, an agreement was reached in 1955. It's the Austrian State Treaty was signed, in which Austria agreed to be neutral and all of the occupying forces withdrew. Now, there was fear in those days that, oh, what if the Soviet Union doesn't abide by this agreement? Because there's been this Russophobia that's so, rampant all the time. Well, guess what? The Soviet Union never violated this treaty. They never encroached on Austria's eastern borders. I lived in Austria myself for many years, and Austria has enjoyed, pretty good prosperity and good relations with everyone. So this is something that I would propose as an Austrian option for Ukraine. If it were accepted its neutral status, it could have good relations with all of its neighbors.
And probably that's where it will end up at some point, but who knows when or where. And I wanted to ask you, Antonio, if you had anything you wanted to say about that war or the other ones that we touched on, Israel, Gaza.
Marilyn is an expert in mediation, okay? And as you can see, she is very knowledgeable. However, Ellen Brown wrote a very insightful article this week. All wars are bunkers wars. Okay, that's very basic. What the world is doing today is the armaments industry is number one in the world. Okay, and they have to sell those armaments. So they invent conflict, armed conflict, violent conflict, so that they can sell. So the purity of what Marilyn was saying gets lost in these instruments of terror, that are the arms industry and the arms trade, etc., and the politicians interested in that. The United States, it seems to me that the Democrats are more into this than the Republicans, But both parties, they are heavy into this industry, and all the states, So the US is really almost impossible to get out of the mud, And Trump is just using this, for his own. Now, what I'm saying is this. It's very, very complex. And coming back to the table of mediation and dialogue, unless the parties agree to disagree and to sit down and say, we will be talking a vacuum, you know, and whether Gaza, what is happening in Gaza? I mean, that there is nothing, that's genocide.
Mhm.
So there's nothing to, it's a genocide. You know, that's all said and done. It's a genocide. What are we going to say about that? Talk about the dead, talk about the suffering, you know, they talk about everything. But that's what they are doing. They are killing everybody in there. Now, how do you approach this without emotion? You know, because it's an emotional issue. I talk about this, I start getting emotional. And yet, I don't know what the solution is, but we are going to have to find that out, you know? So I mean, I am very humble in this respect, you know? I don't pretend to have all the answers because I don't, you know, basically, I don't, I know that. And what we try to, like, we have our parameters, our guidelines for peace journalism. So we try to write, we try to present the conflict, you know, with in a different way. That's on a ball game, you know, who is winning, who is losing, to present possible solutions, to ask questions to try to answer, and of course, to the governments, ask questions to the governments, you know, and et cetera, et cetera. So there is a process, and you know, but we must educate ourselves. That's very basic. You know, we must educate ourselves about what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. You know, not just follow CNN and you know. There's another article this week that in the United States they are watching more Al Jazeera than CNN and Fox because you know it's less biased.
Mhm. Well,
So
and we do know that. I mean, I know people who watch MSNBC and think they've got all the news they need to make decisions about what's going on or to understand what's going on. And of course, what's left out is what they don't know anything about. So that
yeah,
we're dealing with a strong propaganda arm in the US,
yes,
and people don't know it. It reminds me of the joke where there's back in the 80s, an American is sitting next to a Soviet citizen on an airplane flying to the US. And the American turns to the Russian and he says, well, what's bringing you to the US? And he said, well, I'm coming here to study American propaganda. And the American says, what American propaganda? And he said, exactly. So that's where we are. So I wanted to get to, well, before I get to it, I wanted to mention the Transcend News Service because what you offer in this is a real big look at what's going on in the world and what some of the solutions are. And it's for thinking people, for people who really want to understand more. And I want to kind of do a little commercial in this hour to tell people that they should sign up for it. Transcend.org, is that correct?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's transcend.org/TMS. That will take you
yes.
directly to Transcend Media Service.
Great, and I'll
Yes.
put it
Thank
in
you
with
very much.
the link that I send because I think this is the kind of information that at least our Praxis members really want. And I'm going to suggest that they subscribe and get the weekly news service and get better educated. All of us need it. And now I want to go to something that's very inspirational, and that is the Chechen miracle. And I'll start with you, Antonio, and then I want you, Marilyn, to talk about it.
Well, I would rather Marilyn talk about it. Marilyn is more knowledgeable about this specific, you know. Marilyn, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Yeah, yeah.
Antonio. And as before I begin on the Chechen situation, I just want to, affirm what Antonio you said about the situation in West Asia with Gaza, the Gaza genocide, etc., and just reiterate your point. What's happening there is not a conflict. People talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't view that as a conflict. It's a brutal occupation. It's a very brutal occupation,
Yeah.
genocidal in many respects. So that's something that's different and has to be dealt with. Also, the Iran situation. This again is a brutal war of aggression initiated by Israel and the US. Iran wasn't hurting them at all. In any event, just something to think about. But in terms of Chechnya, I learned of this through Scott Ritter, the former weapons inspector, who he's a Marine. He fought in the first Gulf War, been a Marine all his life, and became a UN weapons inspector in the 90s and around the early 2000s. He's one of the whistleblowers who made clear that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction as claimed by President George W. Bush. And he spoke very loudly about that. He's become a very, very vocal peace advocate and peace activist in his own right. He writes a lot and he's got incredible analysis. So I encourage you to follow him. Anyway, he had the opportunity to travel to Russia a few times in recent years, trying to fight the scourge of Russophobia that is making it so difficult for our peoples across cultures to live together and coexist in a good way. And in the course of one of his trips, he spent some time in Chechnya and discovered some very interesting facts about the history there. As you'll probably all recall, back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was this big separatist movement in Chechnya, which is a part of the Russian Federation. It's a area that's populated by people of mostly Islamic faith. It's got its own unique culture. And there was this big movement to separate away from the Russian Federation at that time. And there was a lot of fighting. Russia did not want it to separate. There was massive amounts of killing on all sides. The capital city of Grozny was pretty much destroyed. It was really devastating. Now, what turned things around? Basically, in I'd say the mid 2000s or so, I don't have the exact dates. It was thanks to leadership on both sides, Vladimir Putin on the side of the Russians and Ahmad Kadyrov on the side of the Chechens, who found a way to come together and sort things out. And they realized that one of the reasons why the fighting kept going on and they couldn't find any solution or any way to stop it was that it was being fomented by outside jihadists who were, funded and supported by the usual suspects, CIA, MI6, who wanted to have Russia break up. And so they decided, wait a minute, we don't want to have these outsiders causing problems in our country. We just want to live in peace and live our lives. And they realized that they would be much better off if they learned to accept each other internally, the Russians and the Chechens, and live together, and told these outsiders to leave and leave them alone. So I'll just I can read from you a quote that Scott Ritter provided in one of the articles he wrote about this. This is quoting one of the Chechen leaders. "We have witnessed for ourselves how outside parties sought to infect us with their foreign ideology in order to further their larger struggle against Russia. We ended up realizing that the best way to protect ourselves from being destroyed by these foreign agents was to align ourselves with Russia. In doing so, we discovered that the Russians shared our same desire to live in peace, free from outside manipulation." Now, this was at the time of the beginning of the special military operation, which the Chechen fighters participated in. So this leader explained further, "This is why we have made fighting alongside Russia in the special military operation such a high priority. We see in the Banderist forces in Ukraine, those are those neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine, the same evil we saw in the foreign jihadists who came to fight in Chechnya. We worked with Russia to destroy this evil back in the early 2000s, and today we are working with our Russian brothers to destroy the same evil as it has been manifested in Ukraine." So today, Chechnya enjoys a certain level of autonomy, as do some other regions of Russia, but it is proudly part of the Russian Federation. And there's a view that, wow, this could be a vision for for Ukraine as well, because Ukrainians and Russians are basically brothers. Most Ukrainians and Russians have relatives in the other country. And if they could somehow come to the realization that the outside troublemakers from NATO are really what's causing the problem, there would be the possibility of moving forward in a positive way, as has happened in Chechnya with Russia, within the Russian Federation.
Yes, I think all this is very important to understand that there are solutions happening in the world today and in recent times, and to learn from them. And we don't ever hear about this Chechen miracle. We don't hear about the miracles. We don't hear about the Ecuador, Peru solutions. We don't get this kind of information. So this is, again, going back to the Transcend News Service, where this kind of information is available. And I want, maybe before we finish, I want you to talk a little more about about Transcend, about how you go about assembling the articles and videos you put in the service, and what you hope it gives all of us, Antonio.
Well, these pieces that I choose every week, I read the whole internet, and I receive maybe 200 emails a day, from news sources and commentary, etc., etc. So I have to select. Now that selection is, to me, second nature. I have as a second nature, really. I have in here 5 guidelines for peace journalists. Okay. Peace journalism explores the background and context of conflict formation, presenting causes and options on every side, not just both sides. Okay, it's that complex that I was talking about. Number 2, gives voice to the views of all rival parties from all levels. Okay, number 3, offers creative ideas for conflict resolution, development, peacemaking, and peacekeeping. Number 4, exposes lies, cover-up attempts, and culprits on all sides, and reveals excesses committed by and suffering inflicted on peoples of all parties, like in Gaza. In number 5, pays attention to peace stories and post-war developments. That's what we are doing here with Marilyn, explaining. So it's very, very, complex, but at the same time, it's, itemized, so it's a process. Peace is not an event. Peace is a process. And unless we start that process, we never get there, like South Africa, Mandela, that was a landmark, how Mandela turned around all the hatred. I mean, totally the hatred. He just let's do here, something never done before. Let's forgive each other and go ahead with life, So this is what Johan was trying to say with transcendence. We need to think new solutions, not those old methods of, compromise and, win. So that's easy in me. When I choose the article for TMS, I have all of this in mind, okay? What I leave out, for example, everybody writes about Trump nowadays, everybody, because he's the man of the moment, So I just, 99% is just garbage, because they're with him or against him, or, so it's not anything relevant that interests for educate people, okay? So he's an actor, yes, but what they write about him is just to sell newspapers, for those. So I try to concentrate on the important issues, what people are writing about. And I wouldn't know how to, I have to sit down and write this because, from the top of my head, I really don't know how to, exemplify because It's automatic. It's automatic. I know immediately what fits, what doesn't fit. And because it's only me here, I don't have to be accountable for anybody else. So it's really an internal process that I just use it. I don't have to now, but I'm gonna have to do that. I have Persis coming, and I have to explain to her how I do. But it's based on these principles of peace journalism that basically Jake Lynch and Johan Galtung wrote in the beginning. Okay, and there are many others today. Many others. I don't follow those because I don't want to be distracted. But there is peace journalism, there is non-violent journalism, etc., etc. And okay, these are ramifications, and all well. We need the more the better.
Yes.
The more ramifications, the better. But here, I try to stick with our ideology of side with the oppressed, never with the oppressor, and with the purity of peace journalism. Peace journalism. You know, it's an ideology actually. It's an ideology. It's not. It's something that we must believe in. It's not just to make money. No, it's not. It's not to expose, my skills or anything like that. It's much more than that, and
It's ethical.
I'm sorry.
It's an ethical
Yes. Oh,
process.
yes, absolutely. It's ethical. And we have many examples. I mean, our icons are Gandhi and Mandela and Olof Palme. You know, even Gorbachev
Yes, I
with
agree.
the Soviet Union. What he did was fantastic. You know,
He was a
and
visionary.
yes, with the perestroika, etc.
Yeah,
And there are many others through life. Those the right stories. The president of Mexico, for example, she is doing
yeah,
wonderful things in there.
yeah. It's
Okay.
incredible.
Yes. And
Inspiring.
she's facing Trump, right?
Hmm.
Right. So we need people like that. With ethics, with some principle, and also we need more women in positions of
Yes.
know,
More
of
women like her.
well, we had many women that forget it, like
Yeah.
Condoleezza Rice, Golda Meir, God,
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton,
Yeah. We
etc.
don't mean those we don't mean the
No,
women
we don't.
no, we
No,
don't
we
mean them.
don't.
I always say that women like that were the first ones that kind of broke through the glass ceiling. And the only
Yeah,
way they could do that was to act like bellicose
that's
men.
right. That's right. Yes.
And things have changed now where they're starting to be women who come through who aren't those bellicose male copiers. They're
If you
actually,
notice, these women, they don't wear skirts. They wear suits like men.
yeah,
I never saw Angela Merkel in a suit.
right.
Dilma Rousseff in Brazil was the first woman that she dressed like a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
But all these other women, they dress with suit and tie. It's amazing, they have to be men to succeed. No,
Well,
no,
that's changing.
I
That is
hope so.
changing, like Claudia Scheinbaum. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
changing. And I wanted to just accentuate some of the things you said because I think they're important. That peace is a process, and I've always said that peace is not necessarily a goal. It's a result of right living, of a process, of an ethical process. And if it's a goal, there's something that's wrong with the steps that get you there. But when you see it as a process, it's a living thing. And I think that's an important
yes,
acknowledgement of what peace really is. It's a process, it's not a goal, it's something we embody kind of on a step by step basis.
Yes, that's right. And Georgia, one thing here, I was talking about the arms trade, etc., right? They're
Mhm.
very big. However, if we can change, conflict is part of life. Okay, conflict
Right.
is part of life. We shouldn't be afraid of conflict. Everybody has a conflict, and we don't have to kill each other. So if we can change minds to stop using this violence to solve conflicts, that's that's the trick. Like I forgot his name, but he said, you know, we must build a model that made that model obsolete. We don't destroy them. We make a new model. I forgot his name.
Buckminster Fuller.
That's right. We build a new model that made that model obsolete, the military or whatever, military especially. So we don't destroy them because it's impossible to destroy them anyway, right?
Right.
So we build, and change minds here, and that's what they're trying to do is change how people see and feel and think about the conflicts and the violence, etc., so that we can all start contributing to that. And and I do believe in this, when when we achieve a quantum, the things start changing. Like when they start washing the potatoes, all over the world, the orangutangos or something. They start, as a quantum leap. And I believe in that. If we changing minds, because we are not fighting anything here. We are trying to build something, you know, to get positive,
Right.
not fighting anything, really.
Well, I think you are definitely doing that, creating something positive with the Transcend News Service and your experience in peacemaking and mediating and writing. And you too, Marilyn. I mean, both of you have really extraordinary careers in peace.
And that question that I put the other time, one question that we must ask ourselves and others: what is this conflict all about,
Mhm.
and what are the possible solutions? Okay, this is all in the realm of conjectures, and let's analyze this. What is the conflict all about? You know, they asked Bush, why are you invading Iraq? He said, oh, this is good against evil. Okay, yeah, that's very easy. We are the good, they are the evil. We must destroy the evil. Okay, but if they keep asking that question, that answer is not going to be enough. He's
Right.
going to have to find something more rational and more intelligent do
More
que
intelligent.
we are
Yes.
good, they are evil. This is basic, this is for children. No,
And, but
no.
we have a lot of children in this country who fall for that all the time. And that's kind of discouraging. So, but I want to thank both of you for the time that you spent.
Georgia, if I could just add one
Sure.
closing thought, really briefly, thank you so much, Antonio, for all you said. Well, I just want to, first of all, say one thing that gives me hope is the strength and the resilience of the axis of resistance. There's an incredible woman journalist named Vanessa Beeley. She's often on TMS.
Yeah.
She was in Syria, then she had to flee to Lebanon, but she interviews people throughout the axis of resistance in West Asia, and they're so clear in their purpose in standing up to the bullies that are trying to destroy them, and they're just saying no to injustice. And I see axis of resistance in Haiti also. That's another area where I've been very active. But just on a final note, and Antonio, I think you'll appreciate this. One thing that Johann Galtung always did when he was talking to conflict parties, and it's something that journalists could ask if they're interviewing people on the ground in conflict zones, his favorite starting question was, tell me, what does the city or this country where you are now, what would it look like, and what would you like it to look like 20 years from now? And would you want your adversary to have that same vision for 20 years from now? So for the viewers, think about in your own community where you live in the United States, in another country, if you're in another country, what would you like? We see the problems we have today. What does it look like 20 years from now in the optimal state? And that's then something positive to work for, rather than always focusing on the negative problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, considering that each conflict is a conflict, each conflict is a conflict. If you have slavery, you cannot make peace, the slave master and the slave. There is no peace in that. You have first to unshackle the slaves and then start another process, etc., etc. So it's always a process. So it's the same thing in Gaza. For the genocide, it has to stop. But how we're going to heal that part of the world, that's another process that we must start thinking, after the violence stops. Because that's our responsibility, as peacemakers and people who mean well for us, the human race, and it's a bigger responsibility, yes. But again, I am not here to save the world, okay? So I do my best, but
And you
I
do.
know that I am not going to save the world. So that gives me some peace, and so I will be here. I'll
Yeah,
be
you
here
brought
for.
up another topic that could be a whole other program, and that is negotiating or trying to find the both end when there's a power imbalance, and how to get that power imbalance out of that situation. Because often we're dealing with that kind of thing where there's such a power imbalance. It's really hard to have a real negotiation or a real process, real peace process. But that's another topic. We might visit that another time. In the meantime, I really,
Remember South Africa with that power imbalance. Remember South Africa and
yes,
how Mandela,
that's right.
the Bishop Tutu, of course, many, many, many people, it's not only Mandela, but how they solved this, the conundrum. So
Yes.
it's very exciting, actually. It's very exciting. We think
Yeah.
about solutions.
We have things, we have people we can look at and processes that we can learn from. And certainly you
Yeah.
focus on them in the Transcend Media Service weekly newsletter, which I want to encourage people to sign up for again. And I want to thank both of you, Antonio and Marilyn, for being on the program with us today. It's been really exciting. So
Thank
thank
you,
you both.
Georgia. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Thank
Georgia,
you.
thank you.
All right. Mhm.